You're fired." The words echoed through the marble hall as the fifth governess in 6 months fled Blackthorne Manor, her bags barely packed, her pride shattered. The 13-year-old girl who'd driven her away stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, face carved from ice. The Duke didn't even look up from his newspaper. But when Clara Whitmore arrived 3 days later, something shifted. She didn't run. She didn't bow. She looked the impossible girl in the eye and said the one thing no one had dared speak in this house of grief and silence. "You don't scare me. If you want to see how one woman dismantled an empire of fear with nothing but truth, stick with us until the very end. And tell us in the comments what city you're watching from." Let's begin. The autumn rain came down in sheets the day Clara Whitmore stepped off the coach at the base of the long gravel drive leading to Blackthorne Manor. The Lake District stretched around her in shades of gray and green, mist clinging to the hills like ghosts that refused to leave. The estate rose before her like a fortress, all dark stone and narrow windows, built to keep the world out rather than let anyone in. She stood there for a moment, her worn leather case at her feet, her dark cloak already soaked through. The driver had refused to take her any farther. "Begging your pardon, miss," he'd said, his weathered face tight with something between pity and fear. "But I don't go up that drive. Not for any fare." "Why not?" Clara had asked, though she already knew the answer. She'd heard the rumors in the village. Everyone had. "That house eats people," he'd muttered, "especially your kind." Her kind. Governesses. Teachers. Women foolish enough to believe they could tame the untamable. 5 had come before her. 5 had left within weeks. Some in tears, some in rage. One in the middle of the night without even collecting her wages. The stories varied, but the center held. Eliza Blackthorne, daughter of the Duke, was impossible, cruel, broken beyond repair. Clara picked up her case and started walking. The gravel crunched under her boots, each step deliberate. She'd traveled 2 days by coach from London, spent her last shillings on the fare, and had nowhere else to go. Her previous position had ended when the family decided they no longer needed a governess who encouraged their daughters to read philosophy and ask difficult questions. "You teach them to think too much," the lady of the house had said, as if thinking were a disease. So Clara had answered the advertisement for Blackthorne Manor knowing full well what awaited her. An impossible girl, a remote estate, a duke who barely acknowledged the existence of anyone beneath his station. She'd taken the job anyway, because Clara Whitmore had learned one essential truth in her 26 years. Impossible simply meant no one had tried hard enough yet. The manor loomed larger as she approached. Up close, it was even more forbidding. Ivy crawling up the walls like grasping fingers, windows dark and watchful, the whole structure radiating the kind of silence that came from years of words left unspoken. She reached the massive oak door and lifted the iron knocker. The sound echoed like a gunshot. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open to reveal a thin, gray-haired woman whose face suggested she'd forgotten how to smile sometime during the previous decade. "Miss Whitmore, I presume," the woman said. Her voice was as cold as the rain. "I am Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper. You're late." "The coach was delayed," Claire replied evenly. "The roads were difficult." "Everything here is difficult, Miss Whitmore. You'd do well to remember that." Mrs. Dawson stepped aside, gesturing Clara into a cavernous entry hall. "Leave your case there. I'll show you to your quarters. Then you'll meet Miss Eliza before supper." Clara followed the housekeeper through a maze of corridors, each one darker and colder than the last. The house was grand, certainly. High ceilings, expensive furnishings, portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. But it felt abandoned, as if the people who lived here were merely ghosts moving through rooms they no longer saw. "The Duke is away on business," Mrs. Dawson said without prompting. "He returns tomorrow evening. You'll meet him then, though I wouldn't expect much conversation. His Grace doesn't involve himself in domestic matters." "Including his daughter's education?" Mrs. Dawson's spine stiffened. "Miss Eliza is a complicated child. The Duke has done his best, but since her mother passed 3 years ago, she's been difficult to manage. Hence the need for governesses." 5 in 6 months, Clara said. That's not management. That's surrender." The housekeeper stopped walking and turned to face her. For the first time, something other than cold efficiency flickered in her eyes. Listen carefully, Miss Whitmore. I've seen your type before. Young, educated, full of ideas about how to fix what's broken. They all arrive thinking they'll be the one to reach her. They all leave humiliated. Then perhaps, Clara said quietly, they were asking the wrong questions. Mrs. Dawson studied her for a long moment, then resumed walking. Your quarters are here. You have 1 hour to settle yourself. Then you'll meet Miss Eliza in the music room. Try not to antagonize her on your first day. I'll do my best, Clara said, though she made no promises. Well, the room was small but adequate. A narrow bed, a writing desk, a window that looked out over the rain-soaked gardens. Clara unpacked her few belongings methodically. 3 dresses, a nightgown, a comb, and the books. Always the books. She'd carried them from position to position like talismans, their worn covers proof that some truths survived no matter how many times the world tried to silence them. She changed into a dry dress, pinned up her dark hair, and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin. She looked tired. She looked poor. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with no family, no fortune, and no options except to make herself indispensable to people who would never see her as an equal. But she'd learned to live with that. What she wouldn't live with was failure. 55 minutes later, Clara made her way to the music room. She found it easily enough. The sound of a piano being played with furious precision echoed through the halls like a challenge. She opened the door without knocking. The girl at the piano didn't stop playing. Her fingers flew across the keys with mechanical perfection, each note crisp and exact and utterly devoid of feeling. She was small for 13, all sharp angles and rigid posture, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it must have hurt. Clara stood in the doorway and listened. The piece was technically flawless. It was also completely lifeless. When the final note faded, Eliza finally looked up. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue and absolutely unforgiving. "You're the new one," she said. Not a question, an accusation. "I'm Clara Whitmore, your new governess." "You won't last." Eliza turned back to the piano, positioned her hands over the keys. "They never do." "Why is that?" "Because I don't want you here." Clara walked into the room, studying the space. It was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful. Everything perfectly arranged, nothing actually used. Sheet music sat in neat stacks. A violin rested in its case, untouched. Books lined the shelves, their spines uncracked. "What are you playing?" Clara asked. "Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major." "You play it well." "I play it perfectly," Eliza corrected. "There's a difference." Clara moved closer to the piano. "Play it again." Eliza's hands hesitated over the keys. "Why?" "Because I asked." Something flickered in the girl's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of anger. But she played it again, note for note identical to the first performance. When she finished, Clara said, "Now play it wrong." Eliza's hands froze. "What?" "Play it wrong. Make a mistake on purpose." "That's absurd." "Is it?" Clara pulled out the piano bench and sat down beside her. "You play perfectly because you're afraid of making mistakes, so make one. Right now. On purpose." Eliza stared at her as if she'd suggested setting the piano on fire. "You don't understand anything. I understand that you've driven away 5 governesses because you'd rather be alone than risk being seen as less than perfect. I understand that this entire house is a museum to your mother's memory, and you're terrified that if you don't maintain it exactly as it was, you'll lose what little you have left of her. And I understand that your father is so buried in his own grief that he can't see his daughter is drowning right in front of him." Eliza stood up so fast the bench scraped against the floor. Her face had gone white, then red, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Get out." "No." "I said get out." Clara remained seated. "You can scream, you can throw things, you can run to Mrs. Dawson and demand I be dismissed, but I'm not leaving this room until you play that piece wrong. You have no right." "I have every right. I was hired to teach you, and the first lesson is this. Mistakes aren't weakness. They're proof you're brave enough to try." For a moment, Clara thought the girl might actually strike her. Eliza trembled with rage, her breath coming in short gasps, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then, slowly, she sat back down. Her hands moved to the keys. She played the first measure perfectly. The second. The third. On the fourth, she hit a wrong note. It rang out like a bell in the silence. Eliza's hands fell to her lap. She stared at the keys as if they'd betrayed her. "There," Clara said softly. "The world didn't end." "You don't understand," Eliza whispered. "If I'm not perfect, then what am I?" And there it was, the truth hiding beneath all the anger and ice. Clara reached out and gently took one of the girl's clenched hands. "You're someone who's been very brave for a very long time, and you're tired. So incredibly tired." The first tear fell before Eliza could stop it, then another. Then a flood she'd been holding back for 3 years broke through the dam she'd built from perfection and rage. Clara said nothing. She simply sat beside the impossible girl and let her cry. Outside, the rain continued to fall. That night, Clara learned the rules of Blackthorne Manor. Supper was served at 7 o'clock precisely. The Duke's place at the head of the table remained set despite his absence. Eliza ate in silence, her posture perfect, her manners impeccable. Mrs. Dawson supervised from the doorway like a warden guarding prisoners. After supper, Eliza retired to her room to study. She was expected to spend 2 hours on French, 1 on mathematics, and 1 on improving literature. Any deviation from this schedule was noted and reported. Clara waited until the house fell silent, then slipped out of her room. She'd always been good at moving quietly. It was a skill learned from years of living in houses where she belonged but didn't belong, welcome but not wanted. She made her way down the darkened corridors, following instinct more than direction. The library was locked. Of course it was. Every interesting room in this mausoleum was locked. But Clara had learned another skill in her years of governess work. Locks were only as secure as the people who trusted them. She'd brought a set of pins from her previous position, slim pieces of metal that had once belonged to her mother. It took her less than 3 minutes to open the door. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with books, a massive fireplace at one end, comfortable chairs arranged for reading. But what caught Clara's attention was the desk in the corner, papers scattered across its surface, as if someone had been working there recently. She moved closer, her curiosity overcoming caution. The papers were correspondence, letters from various scholars and reformers, all addressed to AB, or simply a friend of the cause. She scanned the contents quickly. They discussed political reform, education for the poor, voting rights, workers' protections. Radical ideas that could destroy a duke's reputation if they became public. At the bottom of one stack, she found a pamphlet. The title made her breath catch, On the Moral Imperative of Universal Education. She opened it. The arguments inside were brilliant, carefully reasoned, passionately written, utterly convincing. The author argued that education wasn't a privilege for the elite, but a right for every citizen, that democracy couldn't function without an informed populace, that the current system was designed to keep power concentrated in the hands of a few. It was signed only with initials, A.B. Adrian Blackthorne. The Duke himself was funding and possibly writing radical political treatises in secret. Clara heard footsteps in the corridor. She quickly replaced the pamphlet, crossed to the nearest bookshelf, and pulled down a random volume just as the door swung open. Mrs. Dawson stood in the doorway, a candle in her hand, her face harder than granite. "How did you get in here?" "The door was unlocked," Clara lied smoothly. "I couldn't sleep and thought I might find something to read. This room is private, off limits to staff." "I wasn't aware. I apologize." Clara held up the book she'd grabbed. "May I borrow this? I'll return it tomorrow." Mrs. Dawson's eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside. "Return it, and don't come here again without permission." "Of course." Clara walked past her and back to her room, her heart pounding. Only when she was safely behind her door did she look at the book she'd grabbed, The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. She almost laughed. Of all the books in that library, she'd grabbed one of the most inflammatory political texts ever written. She sat on her bed and opened it, finding an inscription on the first page in elegant handwriting. "To Adrian, may you find the courage to live by these words. M. M. The late Duchess, perhaps?" Clara read late into the night, piecing together a picture of the man she'd never met. A duke who hid behind his title while secretly supporting revolution. A father who couldn't connect with his grieving daughter. A man who understood how the world should change, but lacked the courage to change it himself. She fell asleep thinking about cowards and hypocrites and the thin line between them. The Duke returned the following evening. Clara heard the commotion from her room. Horses in the drive, servants rushing to attend, Mrs. Dawson's clipped voice issuing orders. She waited until the house settled before making her way downstairs. She found him in the study, sitting behind a massive oak desk, reading correspondence by lamplight. He didn't look up when she knocked. "Come in." Clara entered, studying him carefully. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair silvered at the temples and sharp features that might have been handsome if they hadn't been carved from such rigid stone. He wore his authority like armor, every inch of him radiating the kind of power that came from generations of unquestioned privilege. "Miss Whitmore, I presume," he said, still not looking up from his papers. "Mrs. Dawson tells me you've survived 2 days. That's better than the last one." "Your Grace." Clara remained standing. "I wanted to introduce myself properly and discuss Eliza's education. I'm sure Mrs. Dawson has provided you with the schedule. Follow it." "The schedule is part of the problem." Now he looked up. His eyes were the same winter blue as his daughter's, and just as cold. "I beg your pardon?" Clara had prepared for this moment. She knew men like him. They expected deference, assumed compliance, never imagined a governess would challenge them directly. So that's exactly what she did. Eliza doesn't need more French or mathematics. She needs to remember how to be a child. The schedule you've created is designed for a museum piece, not a living girl. The Duke set down his pen very slowly. "You've been here for 2 days, Miss Whitmore. I've been raising my daughter for 13 years. I think I'm better positioned to determine what she needs. With respect, Your Grace, the evidence suggests otherwise. 5 governesses in 6 months. A daughter who destroys anything she can't do perfectly because she's terrified of failure. A house that feels more like a tomb than a home. That's enough. Is it?" Clara stepped closer to the desk. "You've built a fortress around your grief and locked your daughter inside it with you. She's suffocating, and you can't see it because you're too busy hiding behind your title and your reputation and your—" She'd been about to say secret political work, but caught herself just in time. The Duke stood up. He was tall, imposing, clearly unused to being interrupted. "You forget yourself, Miss Whitmore. I hired you to teach my daughter manners and deportment, not to analyze my parenting or my household." "You hired me to help an impossible girl. I'm trying to do that. But I can't help her if you won't let her breathe." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the desk. Clara could feel her future hanging in the balance. He could dismiss her with a word. She had no recourse, no protection, nowhere to go. But she didn't look away. Finally, the Duke sat back down. "You may proceed with your own methods, for now. But if my daughter's education suffers, you'll be gone within the hour." "Understood. Is there anything else?" Clara thought about the library, the letters, the secret life he led while his daughter fell apart. She thought about calling him out, demanding he practice what he preached in those brilliant pamphlets, but she'd pushed far enough for one night. "No, Your Grace, thank you for your time." She turned to leave. "Miss Whitmore." She paused at the door. "Why did you take this position? You must have known what you were walking into." Clara looked back at him. "Because everyone said it was impossible. And I don't believe in impossible." She left before he could respond. The next 3 weeks transformed Blackthorne Manor in ways no one could have predicted. Clara threw out the rigid schedule. Instead, she took Eliza outside, into the gardens, down to the lake, across the moors in all weather. She taught her to skip stones, to identify birds, to run without worrying about her posture. "This isn't education," Eliza protested on the 4th day, standing ankle-deep in mud after a rainstorm. "Isn't it?" Clara knelt down and showed her the perfect spiral of a snail's shell. "This is mathematics, geometry, the Fibonacci sequence. It's all here, alive if you know how to look." Slowly, reluctantly, Eliza began to soften. She laughed for the first time during their 2nd week, when Clara slipped on wet grass and landed flat on her back. The sound was rusty, as if her laughter had been locked away so long it had forgotten how to work properly. But it was real. They read books together, not the improving literature on misses. Dawson's lists, but stories of adventure and courage, tales of people who made mistakes and survived them. Clara encouraged Eliza to draw, even though her first attempts were clumsy. She praised effort over result, bravery over perfection. "You're teaching me to fail," Eliza said one afternoon, staring at a lopsided watercolor she'd just completed. "I'm teaching you that failure isn't the end of the story. It's just the middle." The Duke observed all of this from a distance. Clara would catch glimpses of him watching from windows, his expression unreadable. He never interfered, never commented. He was a ghost in his own house, present but not participating. It infuriated her. At night, after Eliza was asleep, Clara returned to the library. She'd learned Mrs. Dawson's schedule well enough to avoid detection. She read the Duke's correspondence, his essays, his carefully constructed arguments for a better world. He was brilliant, genuinely, remarkably brilliant. He was also a complete hypocrite. He wrote about the importance of honesty while living a secret life. He argued for courage while hiding behind his title. He championed education while neglecting his own daughter's emotional development. The contrast gnawed at her. On the evening of her third week, she found a new letter on his desk. It was from someone named William Hartley, inviting a B to speak at a reform meeting in Manchester. The letter emphasized the importance of public figures joining the cause, of using their influence to change minds. The Duke had written a response. It sat unsigned on the desk. "I appreciate your invitation, but I must decline. My support must remain private. The work speaks for itself." Clara stared at those words for a long time. Then she did something she knew she'd regret. She took a piece of the Duke's stationery and wrote a new response. "I've reconsidered. I'll attend your meeting and speak publicly in support of universal education. It's time to stop hiding behind philosophy and start living it. A.B." She signed it with a passable imitation of his handwriting, sealed it, and left it with the outgoing correspondence. Then she went to her room and waited for the consequences. They came 3 days later. The Duke stormed into the schoolroom where Clara and Eliza were studying botany specimens. His face was white with rage. "Eliza, leave us!" The girl looked between them, eyes wide. "Father, now!" She fled. The Duke closed the door and turned to Clara. "I received a very interesting letter this morning, confirming my attendance at a reform meeting in Manchester, a meeting I never agreed to attend, a meeting that could destroy my reputation and jeopardize everything I've worked for." Clara stood up slowly. "Then perhaps you shouldn't have spent years writing arguments you were too afraid to speak out loud. You had no right. You had no right." Clara's voice rose to match his. "You sit in your library writing about courage and honesty and the moral imperative to fight for what's right, and then you hide like a coward while other people take the risks. You argue that education belongs to everyone, but you can't even properly educate your own daughter because you're too buried in your own grief to see her. How dare you? I dare because someone has to. You're so busy protecting your reputation and your comfortable life that you've forgotten what it means to actually stand for something. Your wife understood that. She left you that book, didn't she? The Rousseau. She was challenging you to be brave." The Duke's jaw clenched. "My wife is none of your concern." "She is if her death broke both you and your daughter, and neither of you has the courage to admit it." The silence that followed was absolute. The Duke crossed to the window, his back rigid. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You know nothing about my marriage, about what I lost." "Then tell me," Clara said quietly, "because right now all I see is a man who writes beautiful arguments for change while changing nothing, including himself." He turned to face her. For the first time, she saw past the armor to the grief beneath. "She was everything," he said. "Everything I wasn't. Brave, honest, unafraid. She pushed me to be better, to use my position for something meaningful. And when she died, His voice cracked. I couldn't be what she wanted me to be, so I hid. I wrote instead of acted. I supported instead of led. Because if I stepped into that arena and failed, if I tried to be brave and discovered I was only a coward after all, then I'd have nothing left." Clara moved closer. You have a daughter who desperately needs you to show her that trying and failing is better than never trying at all. You have ideas that could actually help people if you just stop hiding them. And you have a choice right now to either keep living in this fortress of fear or to step outside and risk everything for what you claim to believe in. And if I fail, then you fail. But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll be living honestly instead of hiding behind philosophy and privilege. The Duke was quiet for a long time. Then, the meeting is in 4 days, in a rough district. There will be workers, radicals, people who have no love for the aristocracy. If I speak publicly, I'll be associating myself with causes that most of my peers consider dangerous. I could lose everything. Or, Clara said, you could finally become the man your wife believed you could be. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived at Blackthorne Manor. Why do you care? He asked. You're a governess. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? I've spent my entire life being told my thoughts don't matter because I'm a woman, because I'm poor, because I'm not noble enough or rich enough or connected enough to have a voice. Your daughter is growing up in that same world, and she needs to see that courage isn't about titles or money. It's about choosing to stand up even when you're terrified. The Duke walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. I haven't decided, he said, about the meeting. Yes, you have, Clara replied. You're just afraid to admit it. He left without another word. That night, Eliza came to Clara's room. What did you say to him? The girl asked, hovering in the doorway. I've never seen him that angry. Clara set down her book. I told him the truth. That's all. What truth? That hiding from fear is just another kind of prison, and that courage means trying even when you might fail. Eliza was quiet for a moment, then, Is that what you've been teaching me? Yes. Why? Because you deserve to be more than perfect. You deserve to be real. Eliza crossed to the bed and sat down beside her. In the lamplight, she looked younger than 13, small and uncertain and achingly vulnerable. I miss her, she whispered. My mother. I miss her so much it hurts, and I don't know how to stop hurting. Clara put her arm around the girl's shoulders. You don't stop. You learn to carry it, and you let the people who love you help carry it too. Father doesn't talk about her, not ever. I know. That's part of what I told him today, that you both need to stop hiding from the grief and from each other. Eliza leaned against her. Do you think he'll listen? I don't know, Clara said honestly, but I hope so. They sat together in silence, two women from different worlds united by the same fundamental loneliness, the knowledge that the people who were supposed to protect them had failed. But together perhaps they could build something stronger than protection. They could build truth. The morning after Eliza's confession, Clara woke to find a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was sharp and precise, unmistakably the Duke's. Meet me in the library at midnight. Come alone. A.B. She burned the note immediately, her hands steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. A midnight meeting with the Duke could mean only one thing: confrontation. He'd had time to think about what she'd said, about the forged letter, about the accusations she'd thrown at him like grenades. He would either fire her or demand answers, possibly both. Clara spent the day teaching Eliza as if nothing had changed. They worked on sketching birds from memory, a lesson that required the girl to accept that her drawings would be imperfect. Eliza struggled with every line, erasing and redrawing until Clara gently took the pencil from her hand. Stop trying to capture what you remember perfectly, Clara said. Draw what you feel instead. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't it? Close your eyes. Think about the robin we saw yesterday. Not how it looked, but how it made you feel. Eliza closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. It was brave. Small, but brave. It didn't care that we were watching. Good. Now draw that. The sketch that emerged was loose and imperfect, but it had life in it. The bird seemed ready to leap off the page. It's terrible, Eliza said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's honest, Clara corrected, and that's worth more than perfect. They were interrupted by Mrs. Dawson, who appeared in the doorway with her usual expression of disapproval, etched deeper than normal. Miss Whitmore, you have a visitor. Clara's stomach tightened. A visitor? A Lady Victoria Hale. She's waiting in the drawing room. Eliza's face went pale. Lady Victoria is here? You know her? Clara asked. Everyone knows her, Eliza whispered. She was Mother's friend, or claimed to be. After Mother died, she started visiting Father. A lot. The way the girl said it made Clara's instincts flare. What does she want? To marry him, Eliza said flatly. To become the Duchess and fix everything that's wrong with this house, which apparently includes me. Clara stood up. Stay here. Continue your sketching. But stay here, Eliza. She followed Mrs. Dawson to the drawing room, her mind racing. She'd heard of Lady Victoria Hale even in London, a widow of impeccable breeding and substantial wealth, known for her charitable work and her ability to navigate society with ruthless grace, the kind of woman who collected influence the way other people collected art. The woman waiting in the drawing room was exactly what Clara expected, beautiful, poised, dressed in expensive mourning clothes that had clearly been tailored to emphasize her figure rather than hide it. She was perhaps 40, though she'd preserved herself well through whatever means the wealthy used to hold back time. She turned as Clara entered, and her smile was cold as winter marble. You must be the new governess. How quaint. Miss Clara Whitmore, Clara said, offering neither curtsy nor apology for her plain dress and wind-ruffed appearance. Lady Hale, I presume. Indeed. Victoria's eyes swept over her with the kind of assessment wealthy women gave to furniture they were considering purchasing. I've heard about you, the governess who's lasted longer than a month. Quite the accomplishment. If you say so. I do. I also say it's a fragile accomplishment, easily disrupted. The threat was delivered with a smile, but it was a threat nonetheless. Is there something I can help you with, Lady Hale? Actually, yes. I'm here to discuss Eliza's future, and yours, I suppose, since they're rather intertwined at the moment. Clara remained standing. I wasn't aware Eliza's future was your concern. Everything about this family is my concern, Miss Whitmore. I've known Adrian, the Duke, for many years. I was dear friends with his late wife, and I've watched him struggle to manage his household and his daughter while grieving and trying to maintain his responsibilities. It's been painful to observe. I'm sure. Victoria moved to the window, her movements calculated for maximum grace. You seem like an intelligent woman, so I'll be direct. This household needs stability. Eliza needs a mother figure, not a series of governesses who come and go. The Duke needs a partner who understands his position and his duties. I can provide both. And I'm in the way. You're a temporary solution to a permanent problem, nothing more. Victoria turned to face her. I'm not saying you haven't been helpful. From what I hear, Eliza has shown improvement under your care. But improvement isn't the same as resolution. That girl needs proper guidance from someone of her own class, someone who can prepare her for the life she'll actually lead. Clara kept her voice level. And what life is that? The life of a duke's daughter, marriage to someone suitable, management of a great house, social obligations and proper conduct, not running through the moors drawing birds or whatever romantic nonsense you've been filling her head with. She's 13 years old. Precisely. Which means there's still time to correct the damage before it becomes permanent. Victoria smoothed her skirts. I'll be honest with you, Miss Whitmore. I'm going to marry the Duke. It's simply a matter of time. When I do, this household will return to proper order. You can make that transition easy or difficult, but the outcome remains the same. Does the Duke know about these plans? Adrian knows what he needs. He's simply been too grief-stricken to act on it. But that's changing. I've seen the signs. Her smile sharpened. I've also heard about your midnight visits to the library, about how you've been reading his private correspondence. That's rather inappropriate, don't you think? Clara's blood went cold. Someone had been watching, reporting. I think, Clara said carefully, that you're making assumptions about things you don't understand. Am I? Then let me make something perfectly clear. I don't know what game you're playing, whether you fancy yourself in love with the Duke or simply enjoy interfering where you don't belong. But it ends now. You're a governess. Nothing more. And governesses who forget their place tend to find themselves without positions very quickly. Is that a threat? It's a promise. I have considerable influence in society. One word from me and you'll never work in a respectable household again. Victoria collected her gloves. I'm giving you the opportunity to leave gracefully. Finish out the month, collect your wages, and move on. If you insist on staying, I'll make certain your departure is far less pleasant. And if I refuse to be intimidated? Victoria laughed. It was a beautiful sound, cultured and cruel. My dear girl, this isn't about intimidation. It's about reality. You're a penniless governess with no family and no prospects. I'm a lady with wealth and connections. This isn't a fair fight. It was never going to be. She swept past Clara toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I know you forged that letter accepting the Manchester meeting invitation. Yes, Adrian told me everything. He confides in me, you see, about everything. Her smile was venomous. He hasn't decided whether to attend yet. But if he does go, if you somehow convince him to attach his name publicly to those radical causes, I'll make certain everyone knows it was your influence, that you manipulated a grieving widower for your own purposes. Your reputation will be destroyed, his will be damaged, and Eliza will be left with neither father nor governess. You would do that? In a heartbeat. Because unlike you, I understand how this world actually works. Power protects power, and you, Miss Whitmore, have none. She left in a rustle of silk and expensive perfume. Clara stood alone in the drawing room, her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. The woman was right about one thing. It wasn't a fair fight. But Clara had never expected fair. She'd only expected to win. The question was how. That evening at dinner, Eliza was withdrawn and silent. She picked at her food while the Duke sat at the head of the table, distant as always, barely acknowledging their presence. Clara watched them both, father and daughter, each locked in their own grief, unable to reach across the chasm that separated them. Lady Victoria's words echoed in her mind. This household needs stability. Perhaps, but stability without truth was just another form of prison. After Eliza retired to her room, Clara found herself alone with the Duke in the corridor outside the dining room. He'd been about to escape to his study, but she stepped into his path. We need to talk about Lady Victoria. His expression shuddered. That's none of your concern. It is when she threatens me in your drawing room and claims you confide everything to her. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Victoria can be, protective. Protective? She gave me an ultimatum. Leave quietly or she'll destroy my reputation and possibly yours. She's worried about Eliza, about this household. She's worried about losing her chance to become the next Duchess, Clara shot back. And if you can't see that, you're more blind than I thought. His jaw clenched. You overstep, Miss Whitmore. I overstep? You've been letting that woman believe she has a claim on your future while you hide in your library writing manifestos about honesty and courage. Do you even hear yourself? My relationship with Lady Hale is complicated. No, it's not. It's simple. She wants power and position. You want someone to make decisions so you don't have to, but that's not what Eliza needs. She doesn't need another person controlling her life. She needs a father who's actually present. I am present. You're a ghost. Clara's voice rose. You sit at the dinner table like a statue. You retreat to your study. You fund revolutions from the shadows while your daughter falls apart right in front of you. That's not presence. That's absence with a title. The Duke grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her from walking away. His face was inches from hers, his eyes blazing with something between fury and desperation. You know nothing about what I've lost. About what it takes to simply survive each day in this house full of memories. About how every corner reminds me of her. Every moment with Eliza shows me all the ways I'm failing to be what she needs. So yes, I hide. Because if I don't, if I let myself actually feel everything I've been holding back, I'll shatter. And then what good am I to anyone? Clara stared at him, seeing past the armor for the second time. He wasn't cold. He was terrified. Then shatter, she said quietly, because the alternative is staying frozen forever. And that's not living. That's just a slower way of dying. He released her arm, stepping back as if she'd burned him. The midnight meeting, he said, his voice rough. Are you still coming? Yes. Good. We have much to discuss. He walked away, leaving Clara alone in the darkened corridor. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself, her heart racing. She'd pushed too hard, revealed too much of what she thought, what she felt. She was a governess confronting a duke, and there were rules about such things, rules she'd just burned to the ground. The rest of the evening passed in agonizing slowness. Clara tried to read, to prepare for whatever the midnight meeting would bring, but the words blurred on the page. At 11:45, she left her room and made her way through the silent house to the library. The door was already open, lamplight spilling into the corridor. She stepped inside to find the Duke standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He'd shed his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked human, vulnerable. Nothing like the untouchable aristocrat who ruled Blackthorne Manor with cold efficiency. "Close the door," he said without turning around. She did. "I've been thinking about what you said, about hiding, about cowardice." He took a drink. "You're right. About most of it." "Most?" "The part about Victoria. She's not who you think she is." Clara moved closer. "Then tell me who she is." He finally turned to face her. "She was my wife's closest friend. When Margaret was dying, Victoria was there. She held her hand. She promised to look after Eliza and me. And she has, in her way. She's been a constant presence, a source of stability when everything else was falling apart. And she wants to marry you." "Yes." "Do you want to marry her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "I don't know," he admitted. "It would be practical, sensible. Eliza would have a mother figure. The household would have proper leadership. Victoria understands this world in ways that—" He stopped himself, but Clara finished the sentence in her mind, "in ways that you don't." "But," she prompted, "but she's not Margaret. She never will be. And I'm not sure I can spend the rest of my life with someone who's trying to replace what I lost rather than help me build something new." Clara chose her next words carefully. "What did your wife want for you, after she was gone?" He set down his glass and crossed to the desk, pulling out a letter from a locked drawer. He handed it to Clara without a word. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, clearly written by someone who knew she was dying. "My dearest Adrian, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know how you grieve, how you retreat into your mind and your books and your careful plans. I know you'll want to freeze everything exactly as it was, to build a monument to what we had. Don't. Live, my love. Make mistakes. Be brave in ways that terrify you. Take all those beautiful ideas you write about in your essays and actually live them. Stop hiding behind philosophy and become the man I always knew you could be. And most importantly, let Eliza see you fail. Let her see you try and stumble and get back up again. She needs to know that courage isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. I'm not asking you to forget me. I'm asking you to remember me by living the kind of life we always talked about but were too cautious to pursue. Be brave, Adrian. For yourself. For Eliza. For the world that needs voices like yours. Forever yours." Margaret Clara read it twice, her throat tight. When she looked up, the Duke's eyes were wet. "I failed her," he said. "Every promise she asked me to keep, I've broken." "Then keep them now. It's not too late. The Manchester meeting is in 3 days. If I go, if I speak publicly, I'll be attaching my name and reputation to causes that most of the aristocracy considers dangerous. I could lose my position in Parliament, my social standing, the respect of my peers. But you'd gain something more valuable." "What?" "The ability to look your daughter in the eye and tell her you tried, that you were brave, that you lived by the principles you claimed to believe in." He studied her for a long moment. "Why do you care so much? This isn't your fight. You could leave, find another position, forget this broken household ever existed." Clara thought about telling him the truth, that she cared because she saw herself in Eliza, saw the same desperate need to be perfect to compensate for being powerless. That she cared because she was tired of watching powerful men waste their privilege while people like her had to fight for every scrap of dignity. Instead, she said, "Because I believe in what you write. And I think the world deserves to hear it from you directly." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the fine lines around his eyes. "Lady Victoria will destroy you if I go to that meeting. You know that." "Let her try." She has power, Clara, real power. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it struck her like a physical blow. And you don't? She challenged. You're a duke. You have wealth, title, influence. If you wanted to protect me from her, you could. If I wanted to protect you from her, I'd have to acknowledge that you matter to me beyond your role as governess. And that would give Victoria exactly the weapon she needs to destroy both of us. Then what are you saying? He reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so unbearably tender that Clara forgot to breathe. I'm saying, he whispered, that you've disrupted everything I thought I knew about my life. You've challenged every defense I built, questioned every choice I made, and forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in years. And I don't know what to do with that. Clara stepped back, her heart hammering. Your Grace, Adrian. My name is Adrian. Adrian, she repeated, the name strange on her tongue. This can't happen. Whatever this is, I'm your employee. You're grieving. Lady Victoria is watching for any excuse to... I know. He dropped his hand. I know all of that. But it doesn't change the fact that you're right about me, about everything. And if I'm going to start being honest, I have to start with the truth that terrifies me most. Which is? That I'm falling in love with the woman who's teaching my daughter to be brave, and I don't know how to do that without destroying us both. The words hung between them like a confession and a curse. Clara wanted to tell him she felt the same, that she lay awake at night thinking about him, about the brilliant mind hidden behind aristocratic reserve, about the grief he carried like armor, that she'd forged that letter, not just to push him toward courage, but because she wanted to see him become the man he was capable of being. But she couldn't say any of that, because he was right. Acknowledging it would give Victoria and the world exactly the ammunition they needed to destroy them both. You need to decide about Manchester, she said instead, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. Not because of me, not because of what you feel or don't feel, but because your daughter is watching. And what you do in the next 3 days will teach her more about courage than any governess ever could. And after Manchester, if I go, if I speak, if everything falls apart, then we deal with the consequences, together or separately. But honestly, he nodded slowly. All right, I'll go. I'll speak. And whatever happens after that, he met her eyes. We'll face it. Clara knew she should leave, knew that staying in this library alone with him in the lamplight was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with Lady Victoria's threats. But she didn't move. Neither did he. The space between them felt electric, charged with everything they couldn't say. Clara could feel herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than sense or safety. The door burst open. They sprang apart as Eliza stumbled into the room, her face pale, her nightgown twisted around her. Eliza! Adrian moved towards his daughter. What's wrong? I had a nightmare. About Mother. I came to find you, and I heard voices, and She stopped, looking between them. What were you doing? Discussing your education, Clara said quickly. Your father had questions about your progress. Eliza's eyes narrowed. She might be 13, but she wasn't stupid. Adrian knelt down to his daughter's level. Come here. Tell me about the nightmare. For a moment, Eliza hesitated. Then, slowly, she moved into her father's arms. He held her, and Clara watched something crack in his expression. Real emotion. Real connection. The first genuine moment of fatherhood she'd witnessed since arriving at Blackthorne Manor. She was calling for me, Eliza whispered against his shoulder. In the dream. She was calling, but I couldn't find her. And then she stopped calling, and I was alone. You're not alone, Adrian said, his voice rough. I'm here. I know I've failed you. But I'm here now. Clara backed toward the door, giving them space, but Eliza pulled away from her father and turned to her. Don't go, please. Eliza, this is between you and your father. No, it's not. You're part of this too. You're the only one who understands. Adrian looked at Clara, and in his eyes she saw both gratitude and something darker. Fear, perhaps. Or recognition that the lines they'd carefully maintained were already irreparably blurred. Clara sat down in the chair by the fire, and for the next hour the three of them talked. Eliza spoke about her mother, about the memories she was terrified of losing, about the pressure she felt to be perfect because perfect people didn't get left behind. Adrian listened, really listened, and somewhere in that lamplight library, Clara watched a father and daughter begin to find each other again. When Eliza finally fell asleep in her father's arms, he carried her back to her room. Clara waited in the library, knowing she should leave but unable to make herself move. He returned 20 minutes later, closing the door softly behind him. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me what I'd been missing, for refusing to let me hide." "That's what you pay me for." "No, I pay you to teach Eliza deportment and French. You've done something far more valuable. You've taught us both that it's possible to survive grief without being destroyed by it." He crossed to where she sat and held out his hand. Clara looked at it, knowing that taking it would mean crossing a line they couldn't uncross. She took it anyway. He pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they stood there, hands clasped, the enormity of everything unspoken hanging between them. "Manchester is in 3 days," he said. "After that, everything changes." "I know." "Lady Victoria will fight back, viciously." "I know that too." "And you're still willing to stay, to face whatever comes?" Clara thought about running, about taking her wages and disappearing into another household, another life where she'd be safe and small and invisible. Then she thought about Eliza's face when she talked about her mother, about Adrian's essays gathering dust in a locked drawer, about all the ways powerful people wasted their power while the powerless fought for scraps. "I'm staying," she said, "until you tell me to go." He smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. "Then I suppose we're in this together." "I suppose we are." He released her hand, and the loss of contact felt like a small death. "Get some rest, Clara. The next few days will test us both." She left him standing in the library, surrounded by books full of ideas he'd finally decided to live by. 3 days. 3 days until Manchester, until Adrian stepped out of the shadows and into the light. 3 days until everything they'd built came crashing down, or finally, impossibly, began to take flight. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. She didn't sleep that night. She couldn't, because somewhere between teaching a broken girl to be brave and pushing a grieving duke toward honesty, she'd done something unforgivable. She'd fallen in love with the one person in the world she could never have. And in 3 days, everyone would know it. And in 3 days, everyone would know it. The first sign of trouble came the next morning when Clara found Eliza's room empty. Not just empty, ransacked. Drawers pulled open, clothes scattered across the floor, the sketches they'd worked on together torn to pieces and left in a pile by the window. Clara's heart lurched. "Eliza!" She ran through the corridors, checking every room, calling the girl's name. Servants scattered before her, their faces startled. Mrs. Dawson emerged from the linen closet, her expression shifting from annoyance to alarm. "What's happened?" "Eliza's gone. Her room's been destroyed. Where is she?" "I haven't seen her since breakfast. She said she was going to the music room." Clara was already running. She found her in the stables, standing in an empty stall with a razor in her hand. Her beautiful blonde hair lay in uneven chunks around her feet, hacked off in jagged angles that left some patches nearly to the scalp, others hanging in torn wisps. "Eliza, what have you done?" The girl turned, and Clara saw her face was wet with tears, her eyes wild. "I had to, don't you see? I had to destroy it before it destroyed me." Clara approached slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Give me the razor." "No, I'm not finished. I have to. I have to get rid of all of it. Everything that was perfect, everything Mother loved. Because if I destroy it first, then it can't hurt when other people destroy it for me." "That's not how it works, sweetheart." "Yes, it is. You don't understand. Lady Victoria was here yesterday. She came to my room after you spoke with her. She told me—" Eliza's voice cracked. "She told me that Father is going to marry her, that you're going to be dismissed, that everything is going to go back to the way it was before you came, except worse, because now I know what it feels like to not be perfect, and I can't go back to pretending." Clara's blood went cold. She had no right to say those things to you. "But they're true, aren't they? Father's going to Manchester because you made him, and when he does, Lady Victoria will make sure everyone knows you manipulated him. She'll destroy you and send you away, and I'll be alone again with just her and her rules about being proper and perfect and exactly what a duke's daughter should be." The razor trembled in Eliza's hand. "Give it to me," Clara said gently, extending her palm. "Please." "Why? So you can tell me it will all be fine? So you can lie to me the way everyone else does?" "No, so I can tell you the truth." Clara knelt in the hay, bringing herself to eye level with the girl. "The truth is that I don't know what's going to happen. Your father might go to Manchester and everything might fall apart. Lady Victoria might find a way to have me dismissed. You might end up with a stepmother who expects perfection. All of that is possible. Then why shouldn't I just destroy everything now and get it over with?" "Because," Clara said, her voice fierce, "destroying yourself to avoid being destroyed by others is still letting them win. You think cutting off your hair gives you control? It doesn't. It just proves you're still so afraid of their judgment that you'd rather hurt yourself than risk them hurting you." Eliza's hand dropped slightly. "But what else can I do?" "You can be brave enough to let yourself be imperfect in front of the people who want to destroy you for it. You can refuse to give them the satisfaction of watching you break. You can stand up and say, 'This is who I am, and you don't get to define me.'" "I don't know how to do that." "Yes, you do. You've been learning how for weeks now. Every time you drew a bird that didn't look quite right, every time you played a wrong note on purpose, every time you chose honesty over perfection." Clara extended her hand again. "But it starts with giving me that razor and choosing to face whatever comes next with your head up, even if your hair is a mess." For a long moment, Eliza stared at the blade. Then, slowly, she placed it in Clara's palm. Clara closed her fingers around it and pulled the girl into her arms. Eliza collapsed against her, sobbing with the kind of raw, broken sounds that came from a grief too long contained. "I'm so tired of being afraid," Eliza whispered. I know you are." They stayed there in the stable until Eliza's tears ran dry. Then Clara took her back to the house, sat her down, and carefully evened out the damage to her hair as best she could. It ended up short, scandalously short by society standards, but it suited her. Made her look fiercer, older, less like a porcelain doll and more like a real girl who'd survived something difficult. When Adrian saw his daughter at lunch, his face went white. "What happened?" "I made a choice," Eliza said, her chin lifted. "I chose to cut it off rather than let anyone else have power over how I look." Clara watched him struggle with the response. She could see him wanting to demand explanations, to fix it somehow, to restore his daughter to the perfect image she'd maintained for so long. Instead, he said, "It suits you." Eliza blinked. "Really?" "Really. You look brave." Something shifted in the girl's expression. Not quite happiness, but something close to it. Relief, perhaps, or recognition that her father was finally seeing her instead of a ghost of her mother. After lunch, Adrian pulled Clara aside. "Lady Victoria spoke to Eliza yesterday," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Without my permission. She told her about Manchester, about her plans to become the next Duchess. I know, that's why Eliza destroyed her hair. This has to stop. Victoria is overstepping in ways I can no longer ignore." "Then tell her, directly." "I intend to, but first I need to ask you something." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "After Manchester, after everything that's going to happen, will you stay? Even if it becomes dangerous, even if Victoria makes good on her threats?" Clara met his eyes. "That depends on what you're really asking me. I'm asking if you'll stand beside me when I do the thing that terrifies me most. If you'll help me be the kind of father Eliza deserves and the kind of man Margaret believed I could be. I'm asking—" He stopped, struggling with words that had clearly never been easy for him. "I'm asking if you'll be part of this family, not as a governess, as something more." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Adrian, you can't be suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm simply asking if you'd consider it, if circumstances were different, if we could navigate the impossibility of our positions." His hand found hers, hidden between them where no one could see. "I know it's madness. I know there are 1,000 reasons it could never work. But after Margaret died, I promised myself I'd never feel anything again. And then you arrived and made that impossible." Clara's throat tightened. We can't have this conversation. Not now. Not when Lady Victoria is watching for any excuse to destroy us both. Then when? After Manchester. After you prove to yourself and to Eliza that you're brave enough to stand up for what you believe in. After we see what's left standing when the dust settles. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. For now, we survive. We protect Eliza, and we prepare for war. War, he repeated. That's what you think is coming? I know it is. Lady Victoria won't go quietly, and neither will the world when they find out a duke is publicly supporting radical reform. He nodded slowly. Then we'd better be ready. That evening, Lady Victoria arrived unannounced for dinner. She swept into the dining room dressed in emerald silk, her smile sharp as broken glass when she saw Eliza's shorn hair. My dear child, what have you done to yourself? I made a choice, Eliza said, echoing her words from lunch. I didn't want long hair anymore. How very bohemian. Victoria settled into her seat with practiced grace. Adrian, we need to discuss the upcoming parliamentary session. There are several important votes that require your attention. I won't be attending, Adrian said calmly. I have other commitments. Victoria's smile froze. Other commitments? More important than your duties in Parliament? Yes. The silence that followed was glacial. Clara watched Victoria's eyes flick between Adrian and herself, calculating, measuring, searching for the truth she clearly suspected. I see, Victoria said finally. And these commitments, do they involve that reform meeting in Manchester? Adrian set down his fork. How do you know about that? I know everything that happens in your life, darling. I've made it my business to know. She turned to Clara. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, did you enjoy reading Adrian's private correspondence? Did you find his secret political life terribly exciting? Clara kept her expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Then let me be more direct. I know you forged a letter accepting an invitation Adrian had already declined. I know you've been manipulating him, filling his head with romantic notions about courage and standing up for the common people. And I know, she leaned forward, that you've developed feelings for him that are wildly inappropriate given your position. That's enough, Adrian said, his voice like iron. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, this governess has disrupted your entire household, encouraged your daughter to destroy her appearance, and convinced you to throw away your reputation for a cause that will bring you nothing but ruin. The cause is justice, Adrian said, and it's long past time I stood up for it publicly. Victoria laughed. It was a beautiful, terrible sound. Justice? You think those workers in Manchester care about justice? They want blood. They want to tear down everything we've built, everything our families have maintained for generations, and you're going to hand them the knife. I'm going to tell them the truth, that education and political voice shouldn't be privileges reserved for the wealthy, that every person deserves the opportunity to improve their circumstances through knowledge and participation in government. And then when they ask why you've been hiding this belief for years, when they demand to know why a duke who claims to support them has been living in luxury while they starve, what will you tell them then? The question landed like a blow. Clara watched Adrian's expression flicker with doubt. He'll tell them he was afraid, Clara said quietly, and that he's done being afraid. Victoria turned to her, eyes glittering with malice. How touching. The governess speaks for the Duke now. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, what will you do when this all falls apart? When Adrian's reputation is destroyed and he can no longer protect you from the consequences of your manipulation? I'll survive, Clara said, the same way I've always survived. Will you? Victoria reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded paper. I took the liberty of making some inquiries about your past. Your previous position, the one you claimed ended due to philosophical differences with your employer, actually ended because you were accused of theft. A pearl necklace went missing, and you were dismissed without references. Clara's blood turned to ice. That's a lie. Is it? Because I have testimony from the lady of that house stating quite clearly that she suspected you of taking it. Oh, she never pressed charges. Too much scandal. But she made certain no one in her social circle would hire you again. Which is why you ended up here, isn't it? Taking a position no one else wanted because you were desperate. The necklace was found, Clara said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. 3 weeks after I left. It had fallen behind a dresser. The lady wrote me a letter of apology that I still have. A letter you claim to have. How convenient. Shall we test your story? Shall I write to her and ask about this miraculous letter? Victoria's smile was venomous. Or shall we acknowledge the truth, that you're a conniving opportunist who saw a grieving duke and his vulnerable daughter as easy marks? Adrian stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. Get out. I beg your pardon? Get out of my house. Now. Victoria rose slowly, her composure cracking for the first time. You're making a terrible mistake, Adrian. If you choose her over me, over sense and stability and everything your position requires, I'm not choosing her over you. I'm choosing honesty over lies, courage over comfort. And yes, I'm choosing to listen to a woman who's shown me more truth in 6 weeks than you've shown me in 3 years. His voice was deadly quiet. You claim to care about this family, but all you care about is controlling it. Well, I'm done being controlled. If you go to Manchester, I will destroy you both. I have resources you can't imagine, connections in Parliament, in the press, in society. I will make certain everyone knows about your radical politics and your inappropriate relationship with your governess. Your daughter will be tainted by scandal. Your family name will be ruined, all because you were too weak to resist a pretty face and a clever tongue. Then do it, Adrian said. Destroy me. Publish whatever lies you want, but do it knowing that I finally understand what Margaret tried to tell me before she died, that hiding from consequences isn't the same as avoiding them. It's just another form of cowardice. Victoria's face went white, then crimson. She looked at Eliza, who sat frozen at the table, her eyes wide. You'll regret this, Victoria said. All of you. She swept from the room in a rustle of silk and fury. The moment she was gone, Eliza burst into tears. Adrian moved to his daughter's side, wrapping his arms around her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to witness that. Is it true? Eliza asked through her tears. About Miss Whitmore? About the necklace? No, Clara said firmly. The necklace was found. I have the letter proving my innocence. Lady Victoria was lying to discredit me. But why would she lie about something so awful? Because she's desperate, Adrian said. Because she knows she's losing control of this household, and desperate people do desperate things. Eliza looked up at her father. Are you really going to Manchester? Yes. Even though it might ruin everything? Yes. Why? Adrian glanced at Clara, then back to his daughter. Because your mother asked me to be brave. And because you deserve to see that trying and failing is better than never trying at all. Eliza threw her arms around his neck. Then I want to come with you. Absolutely not. Why not? If you're being brave, I want to be brave too. I want to see you stand up in front of all those people and tell the truth. It will be dangerous. There will be crowds, possibly violence. I don't care. I'm tired of hiding in this house while the world happens somewhere else. She pulled back, her face fierce despite the tear tracks. You said I look brave. Let me be brave. Adrian looked helplessly at Clara. She has a point, Clara said quietly. If we're asking her to face the world honestly, we can't protect her from seeing what honesty costs. You can't seriously be suggesting I bring a 13-year-old girl to a radical reform meeting in one of the most dangerous districts in Manchester. I'm suggesting we trust her to handle more than we think she can. The same way you're trusting yourself. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his composure finally cracking. This is madness, all of it. Yes, Clara agreed. But it's honest madness, and that's better than comfortable lies. He looked at his daughter, at her shorn hair and defiant expression, and Clara saw him make a decision that went against every protective instinct he possessed. All right, you can come, but you stay beside me at all times. And if anything dangerous happens, you do exactly as I say. Agreed? Agreed! Eliza hugged him again, and over her head, Adrian's eyes met Clara's. They were 2 days away from Manchester, 2 days from the moment that would either vindicate everything they'd been working toward or destroy them completely. Clara should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting alone. That night, she returned to her room to find a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, crude. Leave before Manchester or face the consequences. You've been warned. Clara burned it in her lamp and went to bed. She didn't sleep, but she didn't run either. The next day passed in frantic preparation. Adrian worked on his speech, writing and rewriting until Clara finally took the pages from him. "Stop," she said. "You're overthinking it." "But I'm about to stand in front of hundreds of people and tell them that everything they've been told about their place in society is a lie designed to keep them powerless. I think overthinking is appropriate." "No. Overthinking is what you do when you're trying to control the outcome. You can't control how they'll react. You can only control whether you tell them the truth. And if the truth isn't enough, then at least you tried." She handed the pages back. "Your wife's letter said to let Eliza see you fail. Maybe that applies to you seeing yourself fail too. Maybe the point isn't to be perfect. It's to be honest and see what survives." He studied the speech in his hands. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't listening." He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face into something young and almost carefree. "I'm listening now." "Good. Then listen to this. Tomorrow is going to be difficult, possibly dangerous. Lady Victoria will have people there watching, waiting for you to fail. The crowd might turn hostile, the press will crucify you, but none of that matters as much as showing Eliza that you'd rather face the world honestly than hide from it safely." "And you'll be there? Beside us?" "Where else would I be?" That evening, Mrs. Dawson appeared at Clara's door. The housekeeper's face was drawn, older than Clara had ever seen it. "May I come in?" Clara stepped aside, surprised. Mrs. Dawson had barely spoken to her beyond the necessary since that first day. The older woman closed the door and stood there for a moment, hands clasped in front of her. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "For what?" "For believing Lady Victoria's lies about you, for reporting your movements to her, for making this household harder than it needed to be." Mrs. Dawson's voice was thick with regret. "I convinced myself I was protecting this family, but I was just protecting the version of it I was comfortable with." Clara studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw what happened at dinner. I saw His Grace stand up to her for the first time, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about what this household needed was wrong." She met Clara's eyes. "You've done more for this family in 6 weeks than I managed in 6 years. You've given them back something I didn't even realize they'd lost." "What's that?" "Hope. The possibility that things could be different, better." Mrs. Dawson pulled an envelope from her pocket. "This arrived today by private courier. It's addressed to you. I suspect it's from Lady Victoria, and I suspect it's meant to intimidate you into leaving before tomorrow." Clara took the envelope but didn't open it. "Thank you for bringing it to me instead of her. Thank you for showing me that loyalty to a house isn't the same as loyalty to the truth." Mrs. Dawson turned to leave, then paused. "Whatever happens tomorrow in Manchester, know that there are people here who will stand with you. Not many, perhaps, but some." After she left, Clara opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in elegant script. "Come to the garden gate at midnight, alone. We need to talk. VH." Clara's first instinct was to ignore it. Her second was to tell Adrian. She did neither. Instead, at 5 minutes to midnight, she wrapped herself in her cloak and made her way through the silent house to the garden gate. Lady Victoria was waiting in the shadows, dressed in dark clothing that made her nearly invisible against the night. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want?" Victoria stepped into the moonlight. Her face was haggard, stripped of its usual polish. "To give you one final chance to walk away. Not for my sake, for yours." "I'm not leaving." "You should, because what's coming tomorrow will destroy you in ways you can't imagine. I have reporters ready to publish stories about your checkered past. I have witnesses prepared to testify that you've been sleeping with the Duke. I have enough poison to sink both of you so deep in scandal that you'll never surface." "Then why warn me?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Because despite what you think of me, I did love Margaret, and she would hate what I'm about to do to her husband and daughter. But I can't stop now. I've committed too much, revealed too much of my hand. If I back down, I lose everything. So you're warning me out of what? Guilt? Out of the knowledge that you're going to be collateral damage in a war you never asked to fight. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Adrian is going to Manchester because of you. He's going to stand up in front of that crowd and attach his name to causes that will destroy his reputation because you convinced him it was brave. But here's what you didn't tell him, what perhaps you don't even realize. Those workers won't see his courage. They'll see a duke playing at Revolution. They'll tear him apart. You don't know that. I know people. I know how they react when someone from privilege tries to tell them about suffering, and I know that when that crowd turns on him, and they will, you'll blame yourself for pushing him into it. Victoria stepped closer. So I'm giving you a choice. Leave now. Tonight. I'll make certain you have enough money to start somewhere new, under a new name, or stay and watch everything you care about burn. Clara felt the weight of the offer, the temptation to run, to save herself, to avoid the catastrophe she could feel building like a storm on the horizon. Then she thought about Eliza's shorn hair and fierce eyes, about Adrian's hand shaking as he wrote his speech, about Margaret's letter asking him to be brave. I'm staying, she said. Victoria nodded slowly as if she'd expected this answer. Then may you find the strength to live with what comes next. She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clara alone in the garden. Clara stood there for a long time, looking up at the stars, thinking about courage and consequence, and the fine line between them. Tomorrow, they would go to Manchester. Tomorrow, Adrian would speak his truth to a crowd that might destroy him for it. Tomorrow, everything would change, and Clara would be there beside him when it did. She turned back toward the house and found Adrian standing in the doorway, watching her. How long have you been there? Long enough to hear her offer you an escape. I'm not taking it. I know. He walked toward her, his face serious in the moonlight. But you should. Clara, everything Victoria said is true. That crowd tomorrow won't see courage. They'll see privilege, and they might very well tear us apart for it. Then we get torn apart honestly instead of hiding safely. Why? The question was raw, desperate. Why are you willing to risk everything for this? For us. Clara looked at him, this complicated, brilliant, broken man who'd finally found the courage to step out of his own shadow. And she told him the truth she'd been avoiding since the night in the library. Because I love you. Because I love Eliza. Because I'm tired of watching powerful people waste their power while the rest of us fight for scraps. And because if I run now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to stay. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Adrian closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was desperate and tender and full of everything they couldn't say. Clara felt herself falling into it, into him, into the impossible dream of a future where a governess and a duke could build something real. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. Tomorrow changes everything, Adrian whispered. I know. And you're sure? Absolutely sure. Clara thought about all the ways this could end badly, all the ways Victoria could destroy them, all the reasons this was the worst decision she'd ever made. I'm sure, she said. He kissed her again, softer this time. Then he took her hand and led her back into the house. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows. Neither of them noticed the camera that had captured their embrace. Lady Victoria stood in the darkness, holding the photograph that would ruin them both, and smiled. Lady Victoria stood in the darkness, holding the photograph that would ruin them both, and smiled. But she didn't know that Clara had seen the flash. The brief flare of light from the camera had caught Clara's eye just as Adrian pulled away from their kiss. She'd said nothing, done nothing to alert him, just filed the information away with the cold calculation she'd learned from years of surviving in households where one misstep meant losing everything. Victoria had her weapon, but Clara had something more valuable. She knew it was coming. They left for Manchester at dawn. The journey took 6 hours by coach, the roads rough and muddy from recent rains. Eliza sat pressed against the window, watching the landscape transform from rolling countryside to industrial sprawl, factories belching smoke, cramped housing packed tight as graves, streets filled with workers whose faces bore the kind of exhaustion that came from lives spent breaking their bodies for someone else's profit. Is this where the meeting is? Eliza asked, her voice small. Near here, Adrian replied. He'd been quiet since they departed, his face drawn with tension. The hall is in the heart of the factory district. William Hartley chose it deliberately. He wants the workers to see that I'm willing to come to them rather than expecting them to come to me. And are they expecting you? Clara asked. Do they know a duke will be speaking? They know someone significant is coming, but Hartley kept my identity private until today. He thought the surprise would have more impact. Clara's unease deepened. Or it could backfire spectacularly. These people have every reason to distrust the aristocracy. Springing a duke on them without warning might seem like another trick. I know the risks. Do you? Because Victoria was right about one thing. These workers won't see your courage. They'll see your title and your wealth and everything that's kept them powerless. You need to be prepared for that. Adrian turned to look at her fully. What would you have me do? Hide who I am? Pretend to be something I'm not? No. I'd have you acknowledge it immediately. Don't make them discover it. Tell them straight away. I'm a duke, I was born into privilege, and I understand why you'd have every reason to dismiss what I'm about to say. Give them the truth before they have to drag it out of you. He considered this, then nodded slowly. That's good advice. I've had practice reading rooms where I don't belong. The coach rolled deeper into the industrial heart of Manchester. The streets grew narrower, more crowded, heavy with the smell of coal smoke and unwashed bodies in desperation. Clara saw children no older than Eliza working in the streets, their faces smudged with soot, their eyes ancient with suffering. Eliza pressed closer to the window. They're so young. Yes, Adrian said quietly. They are. Why aren't they in school? Because their families need the money they earn. Because education is a privilege reserved for people like us. Because the system is designed to keep them exactly where they are. That's not fair. No, it's not. Clara watched father and daughter share a look of understanding that hadn't existed 6 weeks ago. Whatever happened today, that alone was worth it. They arrived at the meeting hall just before noon. It was a massive brick structure that had once been a textile factory, now repurposed for gatherings too large for the churches or taverns. A crowd had already begun forming outside. Hundreds of men and women pressed together, their clothes worn and patched, their faces hungry for something more than bread. William Hartley met them at a side entrance. He was younger than Clara expected, perhaps 30, with the kind of passionate intensity that came from truly believing the world could change. Your Grace. He shook Adrian's hand with barely contained excitement. I can't tell you how much this means. Having someone of your position speak publicly for the cause, it will change everything. Or destroy everything, Clara murmured. Hartley looked at her sharply. And you are? Miss Clara Whitmore, the Duke's... She hesitated. What was she exactly? Advisor. I see. And the young lady? My daughter, Eliza, Adrian said. She insisted on coming. Hartley's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. Your Grace, I must advise against bringing a child inside. The crowd is energetic, sometimes unpredictably so. She stays with us, Adrian said firmly. We face this together. Hartley led them through narrow corridors into a small room behind the main hall. Through the thin walls, Clara could hear the crowd, their voices a low rumble like distant thunder, building in intensity as more people arrived. You'll speak third, Hartley explained, spreading papers across a makeshift desk. After 2 of our regular speakers warm up the crowd, they'll talk about working conditions, about the need for political representation, about education as a right rather than a privilege. That will set the stage for your remarks. When do they learn who I am? I'll introduce you. I'll tell them that a member of the nobility has joined our cause, that someone with real power has finally chosen to stand with the workers instead of against them. Hartley's eyes gleamed. The impact will be tremendous. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Mr. Hartley, has it occurred to you that these people might not react positively to a duke appearing in their midst? That they might see it as patronizing rather than supportive? With respect, Miss Whitmore, I've been organizing these meetings for 3 years. I know how to read a crowd. Do you? Because I'm reading this one, and what I'm hearing sounds less like enthusiasm and more like anger looking for a target. Hartley's expression hardened. These people have every right to be angry. That's the point. We're channeling that anger into political action. Or into violence, Clara said, which is what happens when angry people feel manipulated. I think I know my own cause better than a duke's governess. The insult landed intentionally. Clara felt Adrian tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. Perhaps you do, Mr. Hartley. I hope for all our sakes that you're right. The first speaker took the stage to roaring approval. He was a factory foreman, broad-shouldered and eloquent, speaking about 12-hour workdays and starvation wages and children losing fingers to machinery while owners got richer. The crowd responded with shouts of agreement, their fury palpable even through the walls. The second speaker was a schoolteacher who'd been dismissed for teaching working-class children to read. Her speech was quieter but no less powerful, describing how education was deliberately kept from the poor to maintain control, how knowledge was treated as dangerous by those who benefited from ignorance. By the time she finished, the crowd was wound tight as a spring. Then Hartley stepped onto the stage. Brothers and sisters, his voice boomed across the hall, we've heard tonight about the conditions we endure and the rights we're denied. But I want you to know that our cause is gaining support from unexpected places. From people who finally recognize that the current system serves no one, not even those it claims to protect. Clara moved to where she could see through a gap in the curtain. The hall was packed wall to wall, easily 500 people, maybe more. Their faces were hard, skeptical, worn down by too many broken promises. Tonight, Hartley continued, we have with us someone who represents everything we've been taught to hate. Someone born into privilege and power, but someone who's chosen to use that privilege for good rather than for control. The crowd's murmur grew louder, suspicious, hostile. Please welcome to our stage, Duke Adrian Blackthorne. The reaction was immediate and violent. Shouts of anger, cries of betrayal, a wave of hostility that crashed against the stage like a physical force. Clara saw Adrian go pale, saw his hands grip his speech so tightly the pages crumpled. Father, Eliza whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Adrian looked at Clara. In his eyes, she saw the same terror she'd seen in the library that first night, the fear of being exposed, of failing, of proving himself to be exactly what everyone expected. She stepped close to him, close enough that only he could hear. Remember what you told Eliza about her hair? That she looked brave? This is your chance to be brave too. Not perfect, just honest. He nodded once, sharply. Then he walked onto the stage. The jeering intensified. Someone threw something, Clara couldn't see what, that missed Adrian's head by inches. The crowd surged forward, pressing against the barriers that separated them from the stage. Adrian raised his hands for silence. The gesture was ignored. The shouting grew louder, angrier, fueled by decades of oppression and betrayal by people who looked exactly like him. Then Eliza did something no one expected. She walked onto the stage and stood beside her father. The crowd's fury stuttered, because whatever they'd expected from a duke, it wasn't this, a small girl with shorn hair standing defiant beside her father, unafraid of their rage. Let him speak, Eliza's voice cut through the noise. If you're going to hate him, at least hate him for what he actually says instead of what you assume he'll say. The silence that followed was stunned. Into it, Adrian finally spoke. She's right. You should hate me. His voice carried across the hall, strong despite the tremor Clara could hear beneath it. You should hate everything I represent. I was born into wealth I didn't earn. I've lived in comfort while you've suffered. I've benefited from a system designed to keep you powerless and me privileged. Every reason you have to distrust me is valid. The crowd's anger wavered, uncertain where this was going. But I'm not here to ask for your trust. I'm here to tell you that the system that benefits me is wrong. It's morally bankrupt, and it needs to be destroyed. Now he had their attention. The jeering had stopped, replaced by wary curiosity. Adrian stepped forward. For years, I've written about reform in private. I've funded movements in secret. I've convinced myself that supporting change from the shadows was enough. But it wasn't enough. It was cowardice. Because real change requires people in positions of power to use that power publicly, to risk everything they have for what's right. And I've been too afraid to do that. Until now. He pulled out his speech, looked at it, then set it aside. I was going to give you carefully reasoned arguments about why universal education matters. about why voting rights should extend beyond property owners, about why the current system serves no one. But you don't need me to tell you that. You live it every day. Adrian's voice grew stronger, more passionate. What you need is for people like me to stop hiding behind philosophy and start acting, to use our positions in Parliament to push for real change, to sacrifice our comfort and our reputation and, yes, even our safety, to fight for a world where a child's future isn't determined by the circumstances of their birth. The crowd was listening now, really listening. I can't undo the privilege I was born into. I can't erase the centuries of oppression that built the system I've benefited from. But I can stand here, publicly, and tell you that I will use every advantage I have to dismantle that system from within. I will vote for universal education. I will support extending suffrage. I will fight for workers' rights and fair wages and safe conditions. And I will do it openly, knowing it will cost me everything my family has spent generations building. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. You have every right not to believe me. Every right to assume this is just another rich man's guilt masquerading as solidarity. So I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to watch me. Hold me accountable. Demand that I follow through on every promise I'm making today. Because that's how we build trust, not through words, but through action. The silence that followed was profound. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person started clapping. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. It wasn't the roaring approval Hartley had probably imagined. It was something more valuable, cautious, skeptical hope. The kind of hope that knew it might be disappointed, but chose to believe anyway. Adrian looked at Eliza, who was beaming at him with fierce pride. Then his eyes found Clara's in the wings. She nodded. You did it. But the moment of triumph was shattered by a commotion at the back of the hall. The doors burst open and a group of well-dressed men pushed through. Gentlemen from Adrian's own class, their faces twisted with rage and disgust. Leading them was someone Clara had hoped never to see, Lord Pemberton, one of the most powerful conservatives in Parliament. This is an outrage, Pemberton's voice boomed across the hall. Duke Blackthorne, you disgrace your title and your family by standing with these rabble-rousers. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. The brief moment of unity shattered as class lines reasserted themselves. Workers pressed forward, ready to defend the Duke they'd been ready to tear apart moments ago. The gentlemen reached for weapons, canes and riding crops and concealed pistols. Adrian stepped to the edge of the stage. Lord Pemberton, I'm exercising my right to free speech. You're betraying your class, encouraging revolution, filling these people's heads with dangerous ideas about equality and rights. Pemberton's face was purple with rage. The Home Secretary will hear about this, the Prime Minister. You'll be stripped of your seat in Parliament. Your daughter will be ostracized from polite society. Your name will be synonymous with treachery. So be it, Adrian said quietly. The simplicity of the response seemed to enrage Pemberton further. He lunged toward the stage, and chaos erupted. Workers surged forward to block him. The gentlemen pushed back. Fists flew. Someone screamed. The careful organization Hartley had maintained dissolved into mob violence in seconds. Clara grabbed Eliza, pulling her away from the edge of the stage as bodies crashed into the platform. Adrian tried to reach them, but was blocked by the surge of people. Hartley was shouting for calm, but his voice was lost in the roar. Then Clara saw her. Lady Victoria, standing at the back of the hall with a photographer beside her, capturing every moment of the riot, documenting the Duke of Blackthorne's spectacular fall from grace. Their eyes met across the chaos. Victoria smiled. Clara understood in that instant exactly how this had been orchestrated. Victoria had tipped off Pemberton, had ensured the conservative lords would arrive at the perfect moment to turn Adrian's speech into a scandal, had arranged for photographers to document not his courage, but the violence his presence had sparked. By tomorrow, every newspaper in England would carry stories about the Duke who incited a riot, about the radical aristocrat who betrayed his class, about the man who brought his innocent daughter into a dangerous mob. Adrian would be destroyed. Eliza would be tainted. And Clara would be blamed for manipulating them both. Victoria had won, unless Clara did something unthinkable. She pushed Eliza toward the side door where Mrs. Dawson had been instructed to wait with the coach. Get to safety, now. But father, I'll get him. Go. Eliza hesitated, then ran. Clara fought her way through the chaos toward the back of the hall, toward Victoria and her photographer. People were screaming, running, trampling each other in their panic to escape. She felt something slam into her shoulder, sending her spinning, tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue, but she kept moving. She reached Victoria just as the woman was directing the photographer to capture Adrian being physically restrained by workers trying to protect him, an image that would look damningly like imprisonment. "Stop," Clara said. Victoria turned, her expression triumphant. "It's too late, Miss Whitmore. The damage is done. By tomorrow, everyone will know that the Duke of Blackthorne is a dangerous radical who endangered his own child for his politics." "You're right," Clara said. "They will know that. Unless they know something else first." She grabbed the photographer's camera and smashed it against the wall. The man lunged for her, but Clara was faster. She pulled something from her pocket, the letter of apology from her former employer, the one that proved Victoria's accusations about the stolen necklace were lies. "This proves you lied about me," Clara said, holding it up. "But more importantly, I have witnesses who saw you meet me in the garden last night, who heard you threaten to destroy the Duke unless I left. Who can testify that you orchestrated this entire riot by alerting Pemberton to the meeting?" Victoria's face went white. "You're bluffing. No one will believe a governess over a lady." "Maybe not, but they'll believe Mrs. Dawson. She was the one watching from the upstairs window last night. She heard everything, and she's willing to testify because she finally understands what you really are, a woman who manipulates grief for personal gain." The truth of it landed like a blow. Victoria staggered backward. "You can publish your photographs," Clara continued, her voice deadly calm. "You can spread your rumors and call in your favors. But I'll make certain everyone knows how you manufactured this scandal, how you used a dead woman's memory to try to control her husband, how you threatened a 13-year-old girl. And when I'm done, no one will care about the Duke's politics. They'll only care about the lady who tried to destroy a family for power." Victoria stared at her, and for the first time, Clara saw fear in her eyes. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." The standoff lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. Then Victoria turned and fled into the chaos, her photographer scrambling after her. Clara didn't waste time celebrating. She fought her way back toward the stage, where Adrian was finally breaking free from the crowd. His jacket was torn, his face bruised, but he was alive. "Where's Eliza?" "Safe, with Mrs. Dawson in the coach. We need to go. Now." They pushed through the mob toward the side exit. Behind them, Clara could hear Hartley trying to restore order, but the riot had taken on a life of its own. Windows shattered. Someone set fire to a stack of political pamphlets. The smell of smoke filled the air. They burst out of the hall into the narrow alley where the coach waited. Mrs. Dawson stood guard at the door, Eliza safe inside. "Thank heaven," the housekeeper breathed. "I thought—" "No time," Clara said. "Drive, now." They piled into the coach, and it lurched forward, horses panicking at the noise from the hall. Through the window, Clara watched Manchester disappear behind them, the smoking ruins of what should have been a triumph. Inside the coach, no one spoke. Adrian held Eliza close, his hands shaking. Mrs. Dawson stared straight ahead, her face grim. Clara pressed her hand against the bruise forming on her shoulder and tried to slow her racing heart. They'd survived, barely. But at what cost? It was Eliza who finally broke the silence. "Father, what you said in there, about using your position to fight for change, did you mean it?" Adrian looked at his daughter, then at Clara. "Every word. Even though it might cost us everything? Even then." Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, bright with something Clara recognized as pride. "Good. Because I'd rather lose everything, and know you tried, than keep everything, and know you didn't." Adrian pulled her closer, and Clara saw tears on his face. Not tears of defeat, but of something else. Relief, perhaps. Or recognition that he'd finally done the thing he'd been most afraid to do. The coach rolled on through the darkening countryside. By the time they reached Blackthorne Manor, it was full night, the house rising before them like a refuge or a prison. Clara couldn't tell which. They stumbled inside to find the staff waiting with anxious faces. News traveled fast, even from Manchester. They'd heard there was violence, that the Duke had been attacked, that everything had gone terribly wrong. Adrian addressed them briefly. There was a riot. We're all safe. That's what matters. He retired to his study, taking Eliza with him. Clara was left standing in the entrance hall with Mrs. Dawson. What really happened in Manchester? The housekeeper asked. Clara told her everything. The speech, the Conservative lords, the riot, Victoria's photographs, the confrontation and the chaos. Mrs. Dawson listened without interrupting. When Clara finished, the older woman nodded slowly. You did the right thing. All of it. Did I? Because it feels like I just made everything worse. Victoria will regroup. Pemberton will use his influence. By tomorrow, the newspapers will have their story, and it won't be the one we wanted them to have. Perhaps not. But here's what I learned watching His Grace tonight, listening to you describe what happened. You can't control how other people weaponize the truth. You can only control whether you tell it. Mrs. Dawson placed a hand on Clara's arm. You've given this family something they'd lost. The courage to stand up even when the outcome is uncertain. That's worth more than any headline. Clara wanted to believe her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just walked into a trap of their own making. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, replaying every moment of the Manchester meeting, every word Adrian had spoken, every second of the riot, every calculation she'd made in confronting Victoria. Near midnight, she heard a soft knock at her door. Adrian stood in the corridor, still dressed, looking as exhausted as she felt. May I come in? It was wildly improper. If anyone saw a duke entering a governess's bedroom at midnight, it would destroy what little reputation either of them had left. Clara stepped aside anyway. He closed the door and leaned against it, his eyes haunted. I keep thinking about what could have happened. If Eliza had been hurt, if the riot had turned deadlier, but it didn't. We survived. At what cost? He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. You were right, Clara, about all of it. That crowd didn't see courage. They saw privilege playing at revolution. And Victoria was right too. I've made everything worse by trying to help. No, Clara said firmly. You made everything complicated by trying to help. That's different. Worse would have been continuing to hide while pretending to care. Complicated means you're actually engaged with reality instead of avoiding it. Victoria will destroy us. You know that. She'll try. But we have weapons too. The truth about how she manipulated this situation, Mrs. Dawson's testimony, the letter proving her accusations about me were false. Clara moved closer to him. We're not beaten yet. Even if we survive this, even if we somehow come out the other side intact, what then? You and I, what we feel for each other, there's no future in it. I'm a duke. You're a governess, I know. But here's what I've learned in my years of being powerless. The people in power only maintain that power because the rest of us agree to the rules. What if we stopped agreeing? He stared at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe the scandal isn't you supporting workers' rights. Maybe the scandal is that we've all accepted a world where a duke and a governess can't choose each other because of arbitrary rules about class and propriety. Clara, that's madness? Revolution? The natural extension of everything you claim to believe in your speech? A slow smile spread across his face. You're dangerous. I'm honest. There's a difference. He crossed to where she stood and took her hands in his. If we do this, if we openly defy every convention, we'll be outcast. Eliza will be tainted by association. The house will be isolated from society. Everything my family built over centuries will be destroyed. Or, Clara said, you'll build something new, something better, something based on truth instead of tradition. And you'll stay, even knowing what it will cost? I'll stay, if you're brave enough to let me. He kissed her then, not the desperate kiss from the garden, but something deeper, a promise, a choice made with full knowledge of the consequences. When they broke apart, Clara said, tomorrow, the newspapers will publish their stories. Victoria will make her move. We need to be ready. How do we prepare for a war we've already lost? We haven't lost yet. We've just forced our opponents to show their hand. Now we show ours. They spent the next hour planning, drafting their own statement for the press. identifying allies who might stand with them despite the scandal, preparing Eliza for what was coming. By the time Adrian left her room, dawn was breaking over the moors. Clara watched the sun rise and thought about courage and consequence and the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. The newspapers arrived at 10 o'clock. They were worse than Clara had imagined. The headlines screamed betrayal and scandal and madness. But buried in the sensationalism was something else. Adrian's actual words. The speech about dismantling unjust systems. The promise to fight for universal education. And beneath the outrage, Clara detected something unexpected. Interest. The letters to the editor weren't all condemnatory. Some, not many, but some, praised the Duke for his courage, for saying what needed to be said. The establishment might want to destroy him, but the people he'd spoken for were listening. It was a small victory, but it was real. That afternoon, a letter arrived by courier. Clara recognized the seal, the Home Secretary's office. Adrian read it aloud to her and Eliza. Duke Blackthorne, your recent public statements have caused considerable concern among your peers in Parliament. We request your immediate presence in London to address these concerns and clarify your position on matters of social reform. Failure to appear will be considered an abdication of your responsibilities. It was a summons and a threat. Adrian set down the letter and looked at Clara. If I go to London, they'll force me to recant everything I said, or they'll strip me of my seat entirely. Then don't recant. If I refuse, I lose everything. My position, my influence, any ability to actually create the change I promised. Or, Eliza said quietly, you prove that you meant what you said. That you're not just another lord who talks about courage, but runs when it gets difficult. Both adults turned to stare at her. She met their eyes with perfect calm. Miss Whitmore has been teaching me that the only way to beat people who want to control you is to refuse to play by their rules. So don't go to London expecting to defend yourself. Go expecting to attack. Make them defend why education should be reserved for the wealthy. Make them explain why workers shouldn't have political representation. Force them to justify the system instead of letting them force you to justify challenging it. Adrian looked at his daughter, this fierce, brilliant girl who'd somehow emerged from grief and fear, and Clara saw the exact moment he made his decision. You're right, he said. Both of you. I'm done defending myself for telling the truth. He stood up, straightening his jacket. I'm going to London, and I'm going to make them listen. Clara felt her heart swell with something dangerously close to hope. We're coming with you, she said. Clara, we're coming. Eliza's right. The only way to win is to refuse their rules. So we go together, the Duke, his daughter, and his governess. And we make them see that the real scandal isn't your politics. It's the system that says we don't belong together. Adrian looked at them both, these two women who'd taught him more about courage than a lifetime of privilege ever could, and nodded. Then we leave tomorrow, together. That night, as Clara packed for London, she felt the weight of what they were about to do. They were walking into the heart of the establishment that wanted them destroyed, armed with nothing but truth and audacity. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt alive. The journey to London took 2 days. They traveled in Adrian's private coach, but the luxury felt hollow against the weight of what awaited them. Clara watched the countryside give way to the sprawling chaos of the capital, smoke-stacked factories pressing against elegant townhouses, wealth and poverty existing side by side in deliberate ignorance of each other. Eliza spent most of the journey reading the newspapers aloud, her voice steady as she cataloged the attacks against her father. The Times called him a traitor to his class. The Morning Post suggested he'd been manipulated by radical influences, a thinly veiled reference to Clara. The conservative papers demanded his immediate removal from Parliament. But there were others, smaller publications, workers' journals, progressive voices that praised his courage. Letters from school teachers and factory workers thanking him for speaking truths they'd been shouting into the void for decades. Listen to this one, Eliza said, holding up a letter that had been forwarded to them. It's from a woman in Birmingham. She says her son works 14 hours a day in a textile mill and can't read his own name because there's no school for children like him. She says your speech gave her hope that might change. Adrian took the letter with trembling hands. And if I fail in London? If they strip my position and I can't actually do anything to help her son? Then at least she knows someone tried, Clara said. That's more than she had before. They arrived in London as dusk settled over the city. Adrian's townhouse stood in Mayfair, elegant and imposing, another monument to inherited wealth. The staff greeted them with the kind of nervous energy that suggested they'd heard the rumors and weren't sure whether to be loyal or start seeking new positions. The summons from Parliament specified that Adrian appear before a closed session of the House of Lords the following afternoon. It would be a trial in everything but name, a chance for the establishment to reassert control over one of their own who'd stepped out of line. That night, Clara found Adrian in his study, staring at the speech he'd prepared for the session. Papers surrounded him, crossed out lines and rewrites covering every surface. "You're overthinking again," she said from the doorway. He looked up, his face haggard. "They're going to destroy me tomorrow. I need to find the right words to what? Convince them you were right? They'll never admit that. To beg for mercy? They won't give it." Clara crossed to the desk and gathered up the papers. "Stop trying to defend yourself and just tell them the truth. The truth is that I'm terrified, that I have no idea if anything I'm doing will actually help anyone, that I might lose everything and accomplish nothing. Then say that. Say you're terrified and doing it anyway, because that's what courage actually looks like." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing against hers. "What if this is all for nothing?" "Then at least we tried. At least Eliza got to see her father be brave. At least we chose honesty over comfort." She pulled back to look at him. "And at least we had this, whatever this is between us, even if it's brief." "I don't want it to be brief." "Neither do I. So tomorrow, when you stand in front of those lords who want to crush you, remember that you're not fighting for them. You're fighting for every person who can't fight for themselves, and for the possibility of a world where what we have isn't impossible." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, and powerless to stop it. The House of Lords assembled at 2:00. Clara and Eliza weren't permitted inside the chamber. Women and children had no place in such proceedings. So they waited in an antechamber, listening to muffled voices through thick oak doors. Mrs. Dawson had insisted on coming to London with them, and she sat beside Clara now, her hands folded in her lap, her face carved from stone. "Whatever happens in there," the housekeeper said quietly, "you've already won something important. You've shown them they can't silence dissent just by threatening consequences." "I hope that's enough." Through the doors, Clara heard Lord Pemberton's voice rise in fury. She couldn't make out the words, but the rage was unmistakable. Eliza reached for her hand. "He'll be all right. He has to be." But Clara wasn't sure. She'd seen how power protected itself, how the establishment crushed anyone who threatened the comfortable order of things. Adrian was one man against an entire system designed to maintain itself. The doors burst open. Adrian stood there, his face flushed, his jacket askew. Behind him, Clara could see lords in their formal robes, their faces twisted with various degrees of outrage and shock. "We're leaving," Adrian said. "Now." "What happened?" "I'll explain in the coach. We need to go before we what?" Lord Pemberton emerged from the chamber, flanked by 2 other conservative lords. "Before we have you arrested for sedition, for inciting violence, for betraying every principle your position represents?" Adrian turned to face them. "You can't arrest me for speaking the truth." "Can't we? You stood before this body and not only defended your radical speech in Manchester, you expanded on it. You called the current system morally bankrupt. You suggested that hereditary titles should be abolished. You essentially argued for the destruction of the very institution you're part of." "Because it deserves to be destroyed," Adrian's voice echoed through the corridor. "This institution was built on the premise that some people are inherently better than others based on accidents of birth, that workers exist to serve the wealthy, that women exist to be controlled by men, that children should be exploited for profit. If defending that system is what being a lord requires, then I don't want to be one." The gathered lords gasped. Eliza's hand tightened on Clara's. Pemberton's face went purple. "Then you're stripped of your seat, effective immediately. You're no longer welcome in this chamber or in polite society. Your family name is tainted, your daughter will never make a suitable marriage, and your political career is over." "Good," Adrian said calmly. "Then I'm free to actually fight for change instead of being bound by rules designed to prevent it." He turned and walked toward Clara and Eliza. But before he reached them, another voice spoke from the chamber. "A moment, if you please." An elderly lord emerged, Lord Ashford, one of the most respected moderates in Parliament. He was ancient, his face lined with decades of political maneuvering, but his eyes were sharp. "Before we proceed with this rather theatrical expulsion," Ashford said dryly, "I'd like to point out something that seems to have been overlooked in all this righteous fury." Pemberton bristled. "Lord Ashford, this is hardly the time. It's precisely the time. Duke Blackthorne has said aloud what many of us have been thinking privately for years, that our current system is unsustainable, that the gap between wealthy and poor has grown so vast that violence is inevitable unless we reform, that education and political representation cannot remain privileges for the few. You can't possibly agree with his radical, I don't agree with his methods. Inciting riots in Manchester was foolish and dangerous." Ashford turned to Adrian. "But his core argument is sound. And more importantly, he's done something none of us had the courage to do. He's forced this institution to confront truths we've been avoiding for decades." A murmur ran through the assembled lords. Some nodded. Others looked furious. "What are you suggesting?" Pemberton demanded. "I'm suggesting that instead of expelling Duke Blackthorne, we listen to what he actually proposed in his speech. He suggested a commission to study education reform. He suggested extending limited voting rights to working men who meet certain property requirements, hardly the revolution you're claiming. He suggested labor protections that most civilized nations have already adopted." Ashford's gaze swept the chamber. "These aren't radical ideas, they're overdue reforms that we've been too comfortable to address. And if we continue to ignore them, we'll face something far worse than one duke speaking uncomfortable truths." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, another moderate lord spoke up. "Ashford has a point. Reform is coming whether we lead it or resist it. Better to shape it than be swept away by it." "This is absurd," Pemberton sputtered. "You're actually considering—" "I'm considering survival," Ashford said bluntly. "France had a revolution because the aristocracy refused to reform. Do we want the same fate? Or do we want to be the generation that chose progress over privilege?" Clara watched the faces of the assembled lords. She could see the calculation happening, the weighing of comfort against survival, tradition against necessity. Adrian stood frozen, clearly not expecting this turn. Lord Ashford approached him. "I won't pretend to approve of your methods, Duke Blackthorne. You endangered your family, damaged your reputation, and created a scandal that will haunt you for years. But you've also started a conversation that desperately needed to happen. So here's my proposal. Instead of expelling you, we form the commission you suggested, to study education reform, with you as its chair." Adrian stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. You've made yourself the face of reform, whether you intended to or not. We can either treat you as an enemy or harness that energy toward actual progress. I prefer the latter. And if I refuse, if I say that working within this corrupt system is a betrayal of everything I claim to believe?" Ashford smiled thinly. "Then you prove Pemberton right, that you're more interested in grand gestures than actual change. But I don't think that's who you are. I think you're a man who stumbled into bravery and now has to decide whether to see it through or retreat into comfortable radicalism." Clara held her breath. This was the moment. Adrian could accept the compromise and work for incremental change from within the system, or he could reject it entirely and become a symbol of pure resistance with no actual power. Adrian looked at Clara. She saw the question in his eyes. "What should I do?" She gave him the only answer she could, a slight nod. "Trust yourself." He turned back to Ashford. "I'll chair your commission, on one condition." "Which is?" "That it includes voices beyond the aristocracy, workers, teachers, women, people who actually understand what education means to those who've been denied it." Pemberton scoffed. "Women on a parliamentary commission? That's non-negotiable," Adrian said firmly. "If this commission is going to mean anything, it can't just be lords talking to lords about what the poor need. It has to include the people we're claiming to help." Ashford considered this. It's highly irregular. So is everything else about this situation? True. Ashford extended his hand. Very well. A commission on education reform, chaired by Duke Blackthorne, with advisors drawn from multiple classes and including female voices. We'll formalize it next week. Adrian shook his hand, and Clara felt something shift in the room. It wasn't victory, not complete, but it was possibility. Real, concrete possibility that something might actually change. Pemberton stormed off, taking his most conservative allies with him. But enough lords remained, talking among themselves, that Clara understood something important had happened. The establishment hadn't been destroyed, but it had been cracked open just enough to let new light in. They left Parliament as the sun set over London. In the coach, Eliza threw her arms around her father. "You did it! You actually did it!" "I compromised," Adrian said, but he was smiling. "Your Miss Whitmore would probably say I sold out." "I would say no such thing," Clara replied. "I'd say you chose the harder path. It's easier to be purely radical when you have no power to actually change things. It's much harder to work within a flawed system and try to reform it from the inside." Margaret would have wanted me to fight harder, to refuse any compromise with, "Your wife wanted you to be brave," Clara interrupted gently. "And you were. You stood up, spoke truth, and then chose to do the hard work of actually creating change, rather than just performing resistance. That's real courage." They returned to the townhouse to find chaos waiting. The street was packed with people, workers, journalists, aristocrats, all clamoring for a statement from the Duke, who challenged Parliament and somehow emerged not only intact, but empowered. Adrian stood on the steps of his townhouse and addressed them briefly. "I went to Manchester because I believed what I wrote in private needed to be said publicly. I went to Parliament expecting to be destroyed for it. Instead, I was given an opportunity to actually work toward the changes I claim to support. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm going to try. And I invite anyone who shares this vision, regardless of class or gender or station, to join me in that effort." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others jeered, but everyone was talking, debating, engaged in a way Clara had never seen before. That night, after the crowds dispersed and the household settled into uneasy quiet, Clara found herself alone in the library with Adrian and Eliza. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. She was curled in a chair, her short hair wild around her face, her eyes bright with exhaustion and excitement. "Now we do the work," Adrian said. "The commission will meet weekly. We'll draft proposals for education reform. We'll face resistance at every turn. It will be slow and frustrating and nothing like the dramatic revolution I imagined in Manchester. But it will be real," Clara said, "and real change is always slower than we want it to be." Eliza looked at her. "Are you staying? To help?" It was the question Clara had been avoiding, because everything had changed in the past week, but the fundamental reality remained. She was still a governess, Adrian was still a duke, and society still had very clear rules about what was and wasn't acceptable. Adrian moved to where she stood by the window. "I'd like you to stay. Not as Eliza's governess, she's learned more in 6 weeks with you than 6 years with the previous tutors, but as something else." "As what?" Clara asked quietly. "As my partner in this work. As someone who understands both the vision and the reality. As—" he paused, struggling with words. "As someone I love and want beside me for whatever comes next." The room fell silent. Eliza watched them with wide eyes. Clara felt the weight of the offer. She could stay. She could be part of building something new, something that might actually matter. But she'd also be stepping fully into scandal. A governess openly partnering with a duke, defying every social convention, subjecting herself to judgment and condemnation from all sides. "If I stay," she said carefully, "people will assume the worst. They'll say I manipulated you, that I'm a social climber using your grief for advancement. Lady Victoria will make certain of it. Let them say it. I don't care anymore. But I do. Because it won't just hurt me. It will hurt you and Eliza and the work you're trying to do. Every proposal you make will be dismissed as the ravings of a duke besotted with his governess. Every reform will be tainted by scandal." "Then what do you suggest?" The pain in his voice was raw. Clara looked at Eliza, at this fierce girl who'd learned to be brave by watching the adults around her fumble toward courage. An idea formed, dangerous and audacious and utterly impossible. "What if we didn't hide it?" she said slowly. Adrian stared at her. "What? What if instead of pretending this, us, doesn't exist or that it's somehow improper, we openly acknowledged it? What if we said yes? A duke and a governess fell in love, and that's exactly the kind of world we're trying to build. One where love and partnership aren't restricted by class." "Clara, that's revolutionary, yes. Scandalous? Absolutely. But it's also honest. And if we're asking the world to change, shouldn't we be willing to embody that change ourselves?" Eliza stood up from her chair. "I think she's right. You told Parliament that the system based on birth accidents needs to be destroyed. Well, here's your chance to prove you meant it. Marry the woman you love regardless of what society thinks." Adrian looked between them, these two women who'd taught him what courage actually meant. "You're both insane." "Probably," Clara agreed, "but we're honest. And right now that's more valuable than sanity." He pulled her into his arms, and in that moment, Clara felt the last of her defenses crumble. She'd spent her entire life being careful, being invisible, accepting that power belonged to other people. But standing here in Adrian's embrace, with Eliza beaming at them both, she realized that power wasn't something you were born with or inherited. It was something you claimed by refusing to accept that you didn't deserve it. "If we do this," Adrian said, "there's no going back. We'll be outcasts from society. Eliza will face judgment. Our families—" "I have no family," Clara reminded him. "And yours has been waiting for you to actually live up to your potential instead of hiding from it. As for Eliza," she looked at the girl, "are you strong enough to face what's coming?" Eliza lifted her chin, her shorn hair making her look older, fiercer. "I cut off my hair to prove I wasn't afraid of being imperfect. I think I can handle people judging me for having an unconventional family." "Then it's settled," Clara said. Adrian kissed her, properly this time, in front of Eliza and anyone who might be watching. It was a declaration and a promise, and a choice to live by the principles they claimed to believe in. The announcement came 3 days later. Adrian made it publicly, in a letter to the Times that was simultaneously a political statement and a personal one. "I am forming a commission to study education reform with the goal of making quality schooling accessible to all children regardless of class. I am also announcing my engagement to Miss Clara Whitmore, who has shown me that courage means living by one's principles rather than hiding behind comfortable tradition. I understand this violates convention." Good. Convention is precisely what needs to change. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Conservative society was scandalized. Progressive circles celebrated. The workers' journals praised him for embodying the equality he preached. The aristocracy condemned him for betraying his class. And Lady Victoria published her photographs from the garden, along with a scathing editorial about manipulation and fallen dukes. But by then, the narrative had already shifted, because Adrian and Clara had controlled their own story rather than letting others define it for them. The commission met for the first time 2 weeks later. Adrian had assembled an unprecedented group, lords and workers, teachers and philosophers, and, to the shock of conservative society, 3 women, including Clara herself. The first meeting was chaos. Class tensions erupted immediately. A factory worker accused the lords of performing charity to ease their guilt. A conservative peer suggested that educating the poor would make them ungovernable. Arguments broke out over everything from curriculum to funding to whether girls deserved education equal to boys. But beneath the chaos, something remarkable was happening. People from completely different worlds were actually talking to each other. Really talking, not performing or posturing. And slowly, painfully, they began finding common ground. Clara sat beside Adrian, taking notes and occasionally interjecting when the discussion veered too far into abstraction. She watched him navigate between competing interests, learning in real time how to lead rather than lecture. After the meeting, as they walked back to the townhouse, Adrian said, "That was exhausting." "That was progress," Clara corrected. "Messy, frustrating, inadequate progress, but progress nonetheless. It will take years to actually implement any reforms, if we even succeed. Then we take years. Change worth having is worth working for." He stopped walking and turned to face her. I meant what I said in that letter. I want to marry you. Not as a political statement, though it is that too, but because I love you. Because you've shown me how to be brave. Because I can't imagine doing any of this without you beside me. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. But are you sure? Really sure? Because once we marry, there's no taking it back. No retreating to safety if it becomes too difficult. I'm sure. Are you? She thought about the life she was choosing, the scandal, the judgment, the constant struggle against a system designed to exclude people like her. But she also thought about Eliza, flourishing now that she wasn't trapped by expectations of perfection. About the children who might actually get an education because of the work they were doing. About the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what had been. I'm sure, she said. They married quietly, a month later, in a small church, with Eliza as witness, and Mrs. Dawson crying happy tears in the front pew. No aristocratic guests attended. They'd been made quite clear they weren't welcome at such a scandalous affair. But workers from the Manchester rally came, and teachers, and the progressive journalists who'd supported Adrian's stance. It was small and imperfect and absolutely perfect. Lady Victoria made one final attempt at revenge, publishing a series of articles claiming Clara had orchestrated everything from the beginning, that she'd manipulated a grieving duke for her own advancement. But the accusations fell flat. Because by then, Clara and Adrian's partnership had produced real results. The commission had drafted its first proposal, a pilot program for free elementary schools in 3 industrial cities. It wasn't revolution, it was one small step. But it was real. A year later, Clara stood in the library of Blackthorne Manor, no longer a locked sanctuary but an open space where the commission met monthly. The room was full of people from every background, arguing passionately about curriculum standards and teacher training. Eliza, now 14, sat in the corner taking notes. She was thriving, bold, brilliant, unafraid to speak her mind. She'd become the youngest member of the commission, her insights on what students actually needed sharp and invaluable. Adrian found Clara by the window, looking out over the moors. What are you thinking about? About how far we've come. About how far we still have to go. Regrets? Not one. He put his arm around her waist, and she leaned into him. Through the window, she could see the first of the pilot schools in the distance, a small building that represented everything they'd fought for. The Workers' Council wants to meet with us next month, Adrian said. They have ideas about expanding the program, making it self-sustaining through community involvement. Good. This was never supposed to be charity from above. It was supposed to be partnership. You sound like a revolutionary. Clara smiled. I sound like a woman who's tired of waiting for powerful people to fix things when we can build better systems ourselves. Inside the library, someone called for order. The meeting was resuming. Clara and Adrian returned to their seats, ready to continue the slow, frustrating, essential work of change. That evening, after the commission dispersed and the house fell quiet, the 3 of them, Clara, Adrian, and Eliza, sat together in what had once been the formal dining room but was now just a comfortable space where they shared meals and stories. I got a letter today, Eliza said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. From that woman in Birmingham, the one whose son works in the textile mill. And? Clara prompted. He's enrolled in one of the pilot schools. He's learning to read. She wanted to thank Father for keeping his promise. Adrian took the letter with shaking hands. One child, out of thousands who still need help. But it's one more than before you spoke in Manchester, Clara said gently. One more than if you'd stayed quiet. He looked at her, this woman who'd disrupted his entire world and shown him what it meant to actually live by his convictions. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. Eliza stood up and hugged them both. I'm going to bed. Try not to stay up too late planning the revolution. After she left, Clara and Adrian remained at the table, hands clasped, looking out at the darkened moors. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, Adrian said quietly. That we survived the scandal. That the commission is actually working. That you're here. Believe it. We chose this. All of it. The difficulty and the joy and everything in between. What would you tell your younger self? The governess who arrived here a year ago expecting to fail within weeks? Clara thought about that frightened, determined woman who'd walked up the gravel drive with nothing but stubbornness and hope. I'd tell her that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. And that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to accept that the world can't change. And was it worth it? Everything we risked. She looked at him. At the man who'd learned to be brave because someone believed he could be. At the life they'd built from honesty and audacity and love. At the small but real changes they were creating together. Every moment, she said. Outside, the first stars appeared over Blackthorne Manor. The house that had once been a fortress of grief had transformed into something new, a place where impossible people built impossible futures and proved that courage was contagious. The governess who wouldn't stay quiet had taught a duke to speak. The duke who'd hidden behind power had learned to use it honestly. And the impossible girl had shown them both that perfection was a prison, but truth could set you free. Together, they'd broken every rule that said they didn't belong. And in doing so, they'd built something far more valuable than obedience to tradition. They'd built a future where belonging wasn't inherited, but chosen. Where courage was measured not by titles, but by truth. Where a governess and a duke and a fierce young girl could stand together and say to the world, "Watch us. We're just beginning.